I pulled into the parking lot of the Meridian at exactly 7:15, 15 minutes late on purpose. My wife had been texting me all afternoon about being on time, about how important tonight was, about how this launch would change everything for us. She had no idea how right she was about that last part. The Meridian was the name she'd chosen for her restaurant. High-end American fusion, she'd called it. The kind of place where a steak costs $60 and the wine list reads like a phone book. She'd been planning this for 2 years, obsessing over every detail from the custom light fixtures to the specific shade of cream for the napkins. And I'd funded every single decision with money she thought was hers to spend forever. The valet looked at my car with barely concealed disappointment. A 10-year-old Lexus sedan, clean but obviously not new. Nothing like the BMW and Mercedes vehicles already lining the lot. I handed him the keys and walked toward the entrance, adjusting my tie. I'd worn my best suit tonight, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe. If this was going to be the last time I saw these people, I wanted to look sharp doing it. The moment I stepped through those glass doors, I knew something was off. The energy in the room shifted like someone had changed the temperature. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they got quieter, more purposeful. Heads turned. Eyes found me. And then came the smiles, the kind that don't reach anyone's eyes, the kind that say we know something you don't. I recognized most of the faces. Her culinary school friends, wearing their chef whites like badges of honor. The investors she'd courted for months. Older men in expensive suits who'd written checks because they liked the way she smiled at their boring stories. The food critics from local publications, already holding glasses of champagne and looking bored. And scattered throughout, our supposed mutual friends, couples we'd had dinner with dozens of times, people who'd eaten at our table and laughed at our jokes. Every single one of them was looking at me like I was a joke they'd all heard before. I made my way toward the bar, keeping my expression neutral. A young bartender, probably 23 and trying too hard to look sophisticated, nodded at me. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey, neat. Make it a double." While he poured, I heard it. A voice behind me. Male, deliberately loud enough to carry. Can you believe it? The practice husband actually showed up. Laughter followed. Not tentative or embarrassed laughter, but the confident kind that comes when everyone's in on the same joke. I didn't turn around. I picked up my whiskey, took a slow sip, and let the burn settle in my chest. Practice husband. That's what they were calling me. Like I was some kind of trial run before she found what she actually wanted. There you are. Her voice cut through the noise, bright and false. I turned to find my wife approaching, wearing a black cocktail dress I'd never seen before. Probably bought it specifically for tonight. Probably bought it with money from our joint account while planning to cut me out of her life. "You're late," she said, her smile tight. "Traffic," I replied. "Place looks nice. You must be proud." Something flickered across her face, too quick to read. "We need to talk. Privately." She didn't wait for my response, just turned and walked toward a door marked private near the back of the dining room. I followed, aware of every pair of eyes tracking our movement. The whispers started before we'd even left the room. The private office was small, probably meant for paperwork and inventory management. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet. Functional. She closed the door behind us, and the noise from the party became muffled, distant. "I'm glad you came," she started, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Wouldn't miss it. 2 years of planning, $8 million of investment. This is a big night." Her jaw tightened. "About that, we need to discuss some changes." "Changes?" She reached into a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope, the kind lawyers use for important documents. She held it for a moment, like she was reconsidering, then set it on the desk between us. "I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while now." I picked up my whiskey and took another sip, letting the silence stretch. She wanted me to argue, to look surprised, to give her some kind of emotional reaction she could use to justify what came next. I gave her nothing. "I've had papers drawn up," she continued. "A clean separation. You keep your investment accounts, I keep the restaurant. We split everything else fairly. No drama, no fighting, just 2 adults acknowledging that sometimes things don't work out." I set my glass down carefully. "You're divorcing me at your restaurant's opening night." "I'm celebrating new beginnings," she corrected. "The first official event at the Meridian is me taking control of my life. It's symbolic." "Symbolic," I repeated. "That's one word for it." She pushed the envelope closer. The papers are straightforward. My lawyer reviewed everything. You just need to sign, and we can both move forward. You told people I was your practice husband. That got a reaction. Her eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise breaking through her rehearsed calm. Who told you that? Does it matter? Is it true? She had the decency to look away. People exaggerate. I may have said something about learning what I needed in a partnership, about growth, about how I was good enough to fund your dream, but not good enough to share it once it came true. Her expression hardened. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. You've had a good life with me. A comfortable life. This isn't about you being inadequate. It's about me needing something different now. I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. Standard dissolution agreement, exactly like she'd described. Fair division of assets, no alimony because we both had our own incomes, clean break. On paper, it looked reasonable. She'd probably shown it to her friends, her family, her lawyer, and they'd all agreed she was being more than fair. What none of them knew was that every dollar in the Meridian's accounts, every piece of equipment in that kitchen, every custom light fixture in that dining room, all of it was structured as a loan, not a gift. Secured debt with very specific terms that her excitement had made her overlook when she'd signed the paperwork 18 months ago. I pulled a pin from my jacket pocket. You're absolutely sure this is what you want? Completely sure. I signed every page without reading them. Quick, efficient strokes that made her visibly relax. She'd expected a fight. She'd prepared arguments, probably had responses ready for every objection I might raise. My cooperation clearly threw her. That's it then, I said, sliding the papers back across the desk. Congratulations on your new beginning. She picked up the papers, checking each signature like she couldn't quite believe I'd made it this easy. Thank you for being mature about this. I know it's not easy, but you'll see. This is better for both of us. I'm sure it is, I agreed, finishing my whiskey. Should I stay for the party, or would you prefer I leave? I think it's better if you go. Less awkward for everyone. Of course. Wouldn't want to make your guests uncomfortable. I stood up, straightening my jacket. One question before I leave. What? Does he know you're divorcing me tonight? Your chef. Does he know he's the reason you're celebrating new beginnings? Her face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Enjoy your evening. I walked out of that office with my head high and my phone already in my hand. Behind me, I could hear her following, probably trying to figure out how much I actually knew. In the dining room, conversation stopped again as I passed through. The practice husband was leaving. Right on schedule. I handed my valet ticket to the kid outside and waited for my car, looking back at the Meridian through the glass walls. Inside, my wife was surrounded by people congratulating her, toasting her success, celebrating her courage. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. My phone showed 3 contacts already queued up. David, my attorney. Harrison, my accountant. And Peter, the investigator who'd spent 6 months documenting every text message, every weekend trip, every lie my wife had told while building her dream on my money. The valet brought my car around. I tipped him $20 and got behind the wheel. Before I pulled out of that parking lot, I made the first call. David, it's me. Execute the withdrawal. All of it. Every account, every payment, everything we discussed. I want the Meridian's accounts empty by midnight. Are you certain? David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Completely certain. She signed the papers. Time to show her what practice actually means. I hung up and started driving. By the time I reached the first stoplight, my phone was already buzzing with incoming calls. I smiled and turned the volume off. Let her panic. Let her scramble. Let her feel what it's like when the foundation you built on suddenly disappears. This was going to be a very long night for everyone at the Meridian. But for me, it was just the beginning of watching everything she'd built collapse under the weight of her own choices. The drive home took 20 minutes, but I spent most of it on the phone executing a plan I'd been preparing for 6 months. By the time I pulled into my building's garage, 3 critical pieces were already in motion. Harrison confirmed the withdrawal from the Meridian's operating accounts would complete by 11:45 tonight. Every automatic payment scheduled for the next 30 days was canceled. Payroll, vendors, utilities, insurance premiums, everything. The restaurant would wake up tomorrow technically solvent, but functionally paralyzed. David was filing an emergency motion to freeze our joint accounts pending the divorce proceedings, citing concerns about asset dissipation. He'd also sent a formal notice to the Meridian's landlord regarding lease obligations and my position as the primary guarantor. That lease was in my name because her credit hadn't been strong enough to secure the space alone. Details she'd conveniently forgotten. Peter was already compiling the evidence packets. Photos, text messages, credit card receipts from hotels I'd never stayed in. 6 months of documentation showing exactly what kind of new beginnings my wife had been planning and who she'd been planning them with. I parked in my assigned spot and took the elevator to the 8th floor. My building wasn't luxury, but it was nice. Clean hallways, working elevators, neighbors who minded their business. The kind of place where successful people live without needing to prove anything. Inside my apartment, I poured another whiskey and settled into the leather chair by the window. The city stretched out below, lights flickering in the darkness. Somewhere out there, my wife was probably still accepting congratulations, still basking in the attention, still thinking she'd pulled off the perfect exit strategy. My phone sat on the side table, screen lighting up every few seconds with incoming calls and messages. I picked it up and scrolled through the notifications. 43 missed calls in the last hour. 17 from her, the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably her business partner, her chef, maybe some of the investors who were starting to ask questions. The messages told their own story. First one came at 9:37. Why aren't you answering? We need to talk about something with the accounts. 9:51. This isn't funny. Call me back right now. 10:04. What did you do? The bank is saying there's a hold on everything. 10:19. You can't do this. There are people depending on this business. 10:38. Please just talk to me. We can figure this out. I set the phone back down without responding. Let her spiral. Let her run through every emotion from confusion to anger to desperation. She'd put me through worse over the past 18 months. The affair started on a Tuesday. I know because that was the first night she came home at 1 in the morning with an excuse about vendor meetings running late. Vendor meetings at midnight. I'd nodded, kissed her forehead, and filed that information away for later. His name was Chase. 29 years old, culinary school graduate with a James Beard nomination and an ego that barely fit through doorways. She'd hired him 8 months into planning the Meridian, brought him on as executive chef with a salary that made my accountant choke. She justified it by saying talent costs money, and if we wanted the restaurant to succeed, we needed the best. What she hadn't justified was the weekend trips to test kitchens in Napa Valley, or the Tuesday and Thursday late nights that became a weekly pattern, or the new lingerie purchased from boutiques downtown that I never saw her wear at home. I'm not stupid. I built a portfolio worth $43 million by the time I was 38 by paying attention to patterns and trusting my instincts when numbers didn't add up. When your wife starts treating you like a business transaction instead of a partner, you notice. So I hired Peter, former FBI, now running a private investigation firm that specialized in corporate intelligence and, when necessary, personal matters. I told him I needed confirmation before I made any decisions. He delivered within 3 weeks. The photographs were thorough. My wife and Chase entering a hotel in River North, leaving 6 hours later, kissing in the parking lot of a wine distributor, his hands in places that had nothing to do with professional relationships. Text messages talking about our future together and how much longer do we have to wait, and I can't keep pretending with him. Peter had apologized when he showed me the file. I'm sorry, man. This is never easy. I'd thanked him and asked him to keep digging. Because if she was planning to leave, I needed to know exactly how she intended to do it, and more importantly, what she thought she was taking with her. That's when I discovered the divorce papers she'd already had drafted, filed at her attorney's office 2 months before tonight. Standard dissolution, fair division of assets, no alimony. She'd been planning this for a while, waiting for the right moment, the right venue, the right audience to make her grand statement. She thought she was so clever. Divorce me at the restaurant launch, frame it as empowerment, as taking control of her narrative. Make me look like the comfortable husband who got left behind while she evolved into something greater. Get sympathy, admiration, and freedom all in one perfectly orchestrated evening. What she didn't account for was that I'd seen it coming and had built my own contingencies. Every dollar I'd invested in the Meridian was structured as secured debt, not gifts or marital assets. The loan agreements, signed 18 months ago when she was too excited about her dream to read the fine print, included provisions for immediate recall if the borrower engaged in fraud, misrepresentation, or activities that compromised the lender's interests. Adultery, particularly when it involved using borrowed funds to finance personal relationships, definitely qualified. The lease on the restaurant space was in my name because her credit score was 642. The equipment, purchased through vendor financing, listed me as the primary obligor. The business licenses, the insurance policies, the trademark registration for the Meridian, all of it had my name attached because banks and vendors don't trust 28-year-olds with big dreams and no collateral. She'd built her empire on my foundation, and now I was pulling every brick out from under her. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number I recognized, her father. I let it go to voicemail. Whatever he had to say could wait until he understood what his daughter had done. At 11:15, David sent a text. Motion filed. Joint accounts frozen pending hearing. Her attorney has been notified. At 11:42, Harrison confirmed. Withdrawal complete. Operating accounts emptied. All automatic payments canceled as requested. At 11:57, Peter sent his message. Evidence packets delivered. Her parents, her business partner, and 3 primary investors now have full documentation of the affair and the timeline showing she planned this divorce while actively soliciting your investment. I finished my whiskey and poured another. Outside, the city continued its late-night rhythm, oblivious to the small drama playing out in one man's apartment. But for my wife, for Chase, for everyone who'd laughed tonight about the practice husband, their world was about to flip upside down. Because here's what she'd forgotten in her rush to move on to new beginnings. I wasn't just the comfortable husband she could discard. I was the investor who held all the cards, the guarantor who controlled the infrastructure, the strategist who'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. She'd called me practice, like I was a rough draft of the life she actually wanted. But practice implies you learn something, implies you improve, implies you don't make the same mistakes twice. She was about to learn that the biggest mistake isn't choosing the wrong person. It's underestimating the right one. My phone rang again. 97 missed calls now. I smiled and turned it face down on the table. Let it ring. Let her panic. Let her spend tonight realizing that signing those papers was the easy part. Tomorrow morning, when the sun came up and the Meridian tried to open for its first official day of business, she was going to discover what happens when you build a dream on borrowed money and then betray the person who believed in you enough to lend it. I raised my glass to the window, to the city, to the future that was about to get very interesting. To new beginnings, I said to no one. May they teach you everything you refuse to learn. The pounding on my door started at 11:43. Aggressive, desperate, the kind of knocking that says someone's world is falling apart and they need answers immediately. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. My wife stood in the hallway, still in that black cocktail dress, makeup smeared, hair falling out of whatever styled arrangement she'd had earlier. She looked like someone who'd just watched their entire life implode in the span of 3 hours. I took my time walking to the door. Let her knock. Let her feel what it's like to need something from someone who doesn't owe you anything anymore. When I finally opened it, she didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed past me into the apartment, spinning around with wild eyes. What did you do? Her voice cracked on the last word. The accounts are empty. Every single account. $8 million just gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, crossing my arms. Gone is inaccurate. Withdrawn is more precise. You can't do that. That's my money. That's the restaurant's operating capital. Actually, it's my money. Always was. You borrowed it, signed agreements acknowledging the terms, and now I'm exercising my right to recall the loan. She stared at me like I was speaking another language. What terms? What are you talking about? You invested in my restaurant. I loaned money to a business venture with specific conditions attached. Conditions you violated. Therefore, the loan is being recalled. It's all perfectly legal. David can explain the details if you'd like, but I assume you'd rather not pay him $400 an hour for information you should have read before signing. Her face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Confusion, anger, disbelief, panic. This is insane. You're destroying my business because you're upset about the divorce. I'm protecting my investment because the borrower engaged in fraud. Fraud? What fraud? I walked past her to the kitchen, poured myself water. Let her stand there processing. You solicited investment capital while planning to divorce the investor. You used borrowed funds to finance a personal relationship that compromised your fiduciary responsibilities. You misrepresented your intentions and your commitment to the business venture. Take your pick. Any one of those constitutes breach of contract. Personal relationship? What are you? She stopped, understanding dawning. You knew about Chase. For 6 months. Every hotel room, every text message, every lie you told while spending my money to build a future with him. Yes, I knew. She sank onto my couch, legs apparently unable to support her anymore. 6 months. You knew for 6 months, and you didn't say anything? Why would I? You were busy planning your exit strategy. I was busy planning mine. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her crumble. The difference is, mine actually works. This is cruel. You're being deliberately cruel. No, I'm being strategic. There's a difference. Cruel would have been confronting you, making a scene, giving you the emotional drama you could spin into victim narrative. This is just business. You wanted a clean separation, remember? No drama, no fighting, just two adults acknowledging things didn't work out. She looked up at me, mascara streaking her cheeks. There are staff members depending on me, vendors who've extended credit. My parents invested their retirement savings. You're not just hurting me, you're destroying innocent people. Your parents will be fine. I'm structuring a repayment plan that protects their investment. They were innocent in this. They believed in their daughter. I paused. As for the staff and vendors, you should have thought about them before you decided humiliating me publicly was worth the applause. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen and smiled. Excuse me, I need to take this. I answered on speaker. David, what's the update? The divorce papers she filed have some interesting problems, David said, his voice filling my apartment. She listed the Meridian as a marital asset subject to community property division. But since it's actually a business venture funded by recalled debt, it has zero value. In fact, it has negative value once you account for the lease obligations and vendor contracts that are about to default. My wife's face went even paler. Additionally, David continued, the joint accounts freeze means she has no access to operational funds for her legal defense. And the evidence of adultery Mr. Wright provided significantly impacts the asset division. Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but courts still consider conduct when dividing property. Her attorney is going to have a very difficult conversation with her tomorrow. Thanks, David. Send me the preliminary filing by morning. I hung up. My wife was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You're taking everything, she whispered. The restaurant, the accounts, even my ability to fight back. You're leaving me with nothing. I'm leaving you with exactly what you earned. Which, if we're being accurate, is a very expensive lesson in consequences. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. You made a series of calculated decisions over 18 months. Decisions that involved lying, cheating, stealing, and planning a public humiliation. That's not a mistake. That's a character reveal. She stood up suddenly, angry now instead of desperate. You're doing this because your ego is hurt. Because you can't handle that I fell in love with someone else. I laughed. Actually laughed. You think this is about love? You weren't in love with Chase. You were in love with the idea of being the successful restaurant owner with the celebrity chef boyfriend. You wanted the story, the image, the validation. Chase was just the accessory that made the picture complete. You don't know anything about what I feel. I know Chase stopped returning your calls about 20 minutes ago, right around the time Peter sent him the documentation showing the Meridian is bankrupt and you're about to lose everything. Funny how quickly love disappears when the money does. She pulled out her phone, checking something. Her hands were shaking. Whatever she saw confirmed what I'd said. No, he wouldn't. We had plans. Plans that depended on my money funding your future together. Without that, what exactly does he get? A 30-something divorcee with no assets and a failed business? I'm sure that's exactly what a 29-year-old chef with a James Beard nomination is looking for. The fight drained out of her. She collapsed back onto the couch, phone falling from her hand. How can you be this cold? I was your wife. We were married for 6 years. And you threw those 6 years away the first time you checked into a hotel with another man. You made your choice, and I'm simply making sure you experience the full consequences of it. What am I supposed to do now? I have nothing. No money, no business, no. Figure it out. The same way I did when I started with nothing. Build something. Earn something. Create something that isn't dependent on using people who care about you. I walked to the door and opened it. But do it somewhere else. We're done here. She stood slowly, like moving hurt. At the door, she stopped and looked back at me. I never wanted to hurt you. You wanted to humiliate me at your victory party. You wanted everyone to watch you discard the practice husband while you moved on to bigger and better things. You wanted the applause more than you cared about the damage. I held her gaze. Well, congratulations. You got everyone's attention. Now they get to watch what happens next. She left without another word. I watched through the security camera as she walked down the hallway, shoulders shaking, the picture of devastation in a cocktail dress. I closed the door and returned to my chair by the window. My phone showed 134 missed calls now. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly very concerned about my well-being. Funny how public spectacle brings out everyone's opinions. Tomorrow morning, the Meridian would fail to open. Staff would arrive to lock doors and bounce paychecks. Vendors would call about missed payments. Investors would demand explanations. And my wife would have to face every single person she'd celebrated with tonight and explain how spectacularly she'd miscalculated. The restaurant industry is small. Word travels fast. By noon tomorrow, every chef, every investor, every food critic in the city would know the story. Not the version she'd planned to tell, but the accurate one. The one where ambition without integrity leads to destruction. I raised my glass one more time, to the empty apartment, to the quiet victory that nobody would write articles about. Some people build empires. Other people learn why foundations matter. Tonight, my wife learned which category she belonged in. The next 72 hours played out exactly as I predicted. The Meridian never opened for business. Staff showed up Monday morning to find locked doors and a notice from the landlord citing lease violations. By Tuesday afternoon, 3 vendors had filed liens against the business. By Wednesday, the story hit the local food blogs. Highly anticipated restaurant closes before opening day. Financial irregularities cited. The article was careful, legally vetted, but the comment section told the genuine story. People who'd been at the launch party, people who'd heard the practice husband comment, people who'd witnessed my wife's grand declaration. They filled in the details the journalists couldn't print. I spent those 3 days working from home, handling the legal paperwork that David sent over and watching the fallout unfold through carefully curated updates. Peter kept me informed about the interesting developments. Chase had indeed disappeared, blocked her number, avoided her calls, and according to his social media, was already in New York exploring opportunities at restaurants that actually had funding. His James Beard nomination apparently bought him plenty of options with people who didn't come with complicated baggage. The investors were less forgiving. 2 of them had attorneys send demand letters by Tuesday morning. Her business partner, a woman named Courtney who'd put in $50,000, showed up at my office on Wednesday. "I'm not here to beg," Courtney said, sitting across from my desk. "I just want to understand what happened." I handed her a folder. "Everything you need to know is in there. The affair, the timeline, the fact that she solicited investments while planning to divorce her primary financial backer. Your money wasn't lost because I'm vindictive. It was lost because she built a business on fraud." Courtney flipped through the documentation, her expression hardening with each page. "She told us you were controlling, that you were trying to sabotage her independence." I'm sure she did. It's easier than admitting she spent 18 months lying to everyone who trusted her. My $50,000 is gone. The business has liabilities exceeding assets by roughly $200,000. You're not getting anything back, and neither is anyone else except her parents, who I'm protecting because they were genuinely innocent. Courtney closed the folder and stood. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. We should have done more due diligence on her character, not just her business plan." After she left, I returned to reviewing contracts for an actual investment opportunity, one involving people who understood that trust and integrity matter more than ambition. Thursday afternoon, my attorney called with the final numbers. "Divorce will be finalized in 60 days, David said. "She's not contesting anything because she can't afford to. You retain all significant assets. She gets her personal belongings and the balance in her individual checking account, which according to the bank statements is currently $473. Her parents. Repayment structure is in place. They'll receive their full investment back over 36 months with interest. I've already sent them the documentation. And the restaurant space? Landlord is terminating the lease. Equipment is being liquidated to cover outstanding vendor debts. The Meridian name and all associated trademarks revert to you as the registered owner. If you wanted to, you could open a restaurant tomorrow using her concept. I smiled at that. I have no interest in restaurants. Let someone else have it. File the trademark abandonment. Generous. Not generous. Strategic. I don't want anything that reminds me this happened. Clean slate. Friday morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Her father knocked on my door at 8 a.m., looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in. He sat heavily on my couch, the same spot his daughter had collapsed on days earlier. I came to thank you, he said quietly, for protecting our investment. We would have lost our home without that repayment plan. You were innocent. You believed in your daughter. That shouldn't cost you everything. He nodded, staring at his hands. She called me yesterday, asked if we could help her get an apartment, co-sign a lease. I told her no. I didn't respond. Wasn't my place. I raised her better than this, he continued. I taught her about integrity, about keeping your word, about treating people with respect. And she threw it all away for what? A fancy restaurant and a chef who ran the moment things got difficult? Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be experienced. He looked up at me. You could have destroyed her completely, sued her for fraud, pressed charges, made sure she never worked again. But you didn't. Why? Because that would have been about revenge. This was about consequences. There's a difference. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. She's working as a hostess at a place downtown, starting over from the bottom. Maybe that's what she needs. After he left, I stood at my window watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, my soon-to-be ex-wife was learning what it meant to build something without shortcuts, without using people, without thinking charm and ambition were substitutes for character. The practice husband had taught her the most important lesson of her life. Some foundations can't be borrowed. They have to be earned. 6 weeks later, I signed the final divorce papers in David's office. She wasn't there. Her attorney delivered her signature separately, probably because she couldn't afford to take time off from her hostess job. David slid the documents across his desk. It's done. Clean break. No ongoing obligations. You're officially free. I signed the last page and felt nothing. No relief. No sadness. Just the mild satisfaction of closing a chapter that should have ended differently. Her attorney mentioned she's applied to 3 culinary positions, David added. Line cook work. Starting from scratch. Good. Maybe she'll learn something this time. I left his office and drove to the building where the Meridian had been. New ownership signs were already up. Some coffee chain was taking over the space, ripping out her custom fixtures and expensive equipment. 2 months of planning, $8 million in investment, all of it reduced to salvage value and cautionary tale. My phone rang. Harrison, my accountant. The investment opportunity in that tech startup closed, he said. Your returns this quarter are up 18%. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Just making smarter choices about who I trust. That evening, I met Peter for drinks at a bar downtown. He'd finished his final invoice, closed the investigation file, and wanted to deliver it personally. You handled this better than most people would have, Peter said, sliding the folder across the table. Most guys in your position either cave completely or burn everything down, including themselves. You did neither. I just made sure the consequences matched the choices. Still, takes discipline. He raised his glass. To smart investments and knowing when to cut losses. We drank to that. Walking back to my car, I passed the restaurant where she worked. Through the window, I could see her seating customers, wearing a standard uniform, smiling that professional smile she'd perfected. She looked tired but focused. Older somehow. She glanced toward the window, and our eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. No recognition, no acknowledgement, just 2 strangers passing in the night. I kept walking. 3 months ago, she'd called me her practice husband at a party full of people who laughed at the joke. Tonight, she was practicing humility at a hostess stand while I walked away with everything I'd built and protected. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others become examples of what happens when you don't. She'd chosen her category. I'd simply made sure everyone understood which one it was. For months after signing the divorce papers, I sold my investment firm to a larger company for $62 million. The deal closed on a Tuesday, and I spent that evening alone in my apartment, thinking about what came next. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. It's me. Her voice, quieter than I remembered. I heard about your sale. Congratulations. Thank you. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. I wanted to apologize. Not because I expect anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I was wrong. About everything. The way I treated you, the choices I made. Thinking success meant leaving behind the person who helped me get there. I appreciate that. Chase is engaged now, to an investor's daughter in New York. I saw it on Instagram. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Turns out you were right about everything. I usually am when it comes to people's motivations. I'm managing a restaurant now. Small place, nothing fancy. But it's honest work and I'm building something without cutting corners or using people. It'll take years to get where I wanted to be, but maybe that's the point. Maybe it is. Do you ever think about what we could have been if I hadn't destroyed it? I looked out at the city lights, considering the question honestly. No, because the person I thought you were wouldn't have destroyed it. I was married to someone who didn't actually exist. She was quiet for a long moment. That's fair. Goodbye. I hope you find someone who deserves what you're willing to give. I hope you become someone who deserves what people are willing to give you. The line went dead. I deleted her number from my phone and poured the last of my whiskey. Tomorrow, I'd start looking at opportunities in different cities, different ventures, different possibilities. The practice was over. The genuine beginning was just starting. She taught me that some people view relationships as stepping stones to something better. I taught her that stepping stones have a way of disappearing when you stop respecting the foundation they provided. Fair trade. I raised my glass to the empty apartment one final time. To new beginnings, I said. The kind you actually earn.